Hi everyone, it's Lynn Dion from Pink Whisper Designs. Today I'm starting a three-part series. This is part one of the series, and in the series we're going to be using the 2023 Art Impressions Scenic Foundations images, and there's 6 sets in this collection. We'll be using all 6 throughout this three-part series. Today we're going to be focusing on masking a background and paper piecing for our images. In part 2, we're going to be doing a mixed media tag, and in part 3, we're going to be doing a vellum overlay technique. And this three-part series will be over the next 3 Wednesdays. And really quickly before we get started, I want to mention that all the products I'm using today are listed and linked down below and also on my blog. And also there is a bundle price, a discounted price, if you buy all 6 of the 2023 Scenic Foundations. So I just want to mention that to you, and that is also linked below. So let's get started by taking a look at the stamp set we're going to be using today. We've got this beautiful scene. This is from the Scenic Foundations collection, and this one is called the Beach Cabin. And this stamp is from Art Impressions. So let's get started by stamping our image. Now, we're going to be doing something a little bit different here. We're not going to use it in the traditional way that these Scenic Foundations were designed. We're going to go ahead and stamp the entire scene, but we're going to stamp it in a very light color. We're using the Lost Shadow Distress Oxide ink, which is a really light gray. We're not going to be stamping those 2 little pots off to the left, so we're going to be masking those off. I've got the Gina K Masking Magic, and I'm going to just cover those 2. This is just a temporary tape that will just cover those 2 while I ink up the rest of the stamp. So again, we're not going to be creating an entire watercolor background the way you would traditionally do. What I wanted to do was show you that if creating a watercolor background is a little bit stressful for you, it's a little bit out of your comfort zone, I want to show you a way to build a background really easily. So we've stamped that image in that light gray ink, so it's going to show just enough so we can design our background. Now I've got another sheet of the Gina K Masking Magic, and I'm just going to cut some strips of this, maybe about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I want it to be long enough to go across that entire panel, and there you can see where the little beach house is. That line is, below that line is the beach, and above that line would be the water. So what I'm going to do is cut this masking tape and place that right along that beach line. We're going to be doing the water first. So we're doing the middle section of the card first. I went ahead and cut that strip in half so that I could angle this part just a little bit off to the right. And now let's determine about how far up we need this next mask to go, because the water, I want the water to go maybe to about there. I do want to make sure this is nice and straight, so I'm lining it up on my glass media mat and making sure that I tape that down nice and straight. So there we're going to be doing the water section, and you can see that there. So let's go ahead and grab some inks. I've got the Peacock Feathers and the Salty Ocean, both again the Distress Oxides. I've got my Hero Arts blending brush, and I'm going to go ahead and blend. And all I'm showing you there is I'm going to be blending right over the top of that cabin. And that cabin is just there to give us an idea of where we need to put the water, the sand, and the sky. And also later when we glue our pieces back on, we'll know exactly where they need to go. So now I've got my Salty Ocean, and I'm going to create that horizon line. And so I'm going to darken that up right along that top piece of masking paper, and then I'll blend that back out with the Peacock Feathers. Let's also spatter this with a little bit of water from the Distress Sprayer. So I'm just spritzing a little bit of water on my glass media mat, and I'm taking a small paintbrush and we'll just spatter that area. I've got a dry paper towel, and I'm just going to blot up that water. That'll give a little bit more texture to the water. Now let's go ahead and remove that masking tape. Now I'm going to heat set this quickly. I want to make sure it's dry so that my tape will stick right over top of that. We're going to do the sky. I'm leaving a little sliver of that blue ink showing, and our sky and the water will overlap there. You don't want a gap there, so you do want to make sure you leave that little sliver of ink. So now I've got my 3 ink pads we're going to be using for the sky. That will be Villainous Potion, Shaded Lilac, and Kitsch Flamingo. Let's start with that darker color, the Villainous Potion, and we're going to put that right at the very top of the water. So it'll be darkest down here at the bottom. Again, I'm using my Hero Arts blending brush just to blend that in. And again, you can see that cabin, the top of that cabin coming through, which is perfect because now we have a rough idea where the top of the cabin is. And then let's go to that Kitsch Flamingo, and then back to the Shaded Lilac, and then we'll just blend that out. So now you can see we have this beautiful sky and our water. So again, this makes creating this background very easy. You could certainly watercolor it in the traditional way, but we are just going to make this really quick and simple. I've got that masking, and now I'm going to put it above where that beach area is going to be. And again, I want to leave a little sliver of color there. I've got antique linen and gathered twigs. We'll start with that lighter color, and I'll blend this all the way down to the bottom. So again, for those of you who are intimidated by creating the background for the scene, this is a really easy way to get around that. Now there are several images in the Scenic Foundations collection. I'm going to do a 3-part series. This is part 1 of 3. I want to show you different ways you can use these scenes in more of a non-traditional way. So keep an eye out for part 2 and 3. They'll be coming shortly. And I do want to mention that the Scenic Foundations are listed and linked down below and also on my blog. There is a Scenic Foundations bundle which has all 6 sets in it. And we will be using all 6 sets in part 1, 2, and 3 of this series. So you may want to look at that as well. I've placed a little bit of gathered twigs on my glass media mat, and I'm going to add a little bit of water and spatter that background. That'll give some nice texture to the beach. So now you can see we have the background of the scene entirely laid out. I've got another piece of Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock. I've placed it in my Misty Stamp Positioner. I'll go ahead and stamp that. And we are going to do some paper piecing. So I'm going to grab a nice collection of these papers. These are double-sided papers. These are from the Art Impressions paper pad, and this is the Easter collection. So these will all coordinate really nicely for our scene. So let's go ahead and grab some paper to do the cabin. I'm going to do the top first, and I'm going to use that purple polka dotted paper. And we could do a few things at the same time. Let's also do that umbrella. I think I'll use that multicolored polka dotted paper to do the umbrella. I was going to do it in that purple, but I changed my mind. So let me just cut a little piece of this so we can tuck it in behind there. And we can go ahead and stamp these two. I've got that sticky mat in there, so that's going to hold that paper in place while we do our stamping. That helps a lot so it doesn't slide around as I'm opening and closing this. So I've got some VersaFine Onyx Black ink and my Stampendable stamp press. I'm going to go ahead and press that out. So let's set those aside to dry a little bit, and now we can do the cabin. I thought it'd be nice to use the stripe on the cabin. It'll give it kind of the look of siding, some siding on the house. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that. And at the same time, I'm going to do that little hat, and I'm going to use that multicolored floral. It has a nice small pattern on it, so it's going to be perfect for that hat. So I just move it around a few times till I get that placement just right. And now I can go ahead and stamp that. And I did want to do the little sailboats. I grabbed this purpley paper with the little flowers on it. But later on, you'll see that I did change my mind on that, and I went back to that paper pack and selected a more pinky corally color. I thought this purple ended up blending in a little too much with my sky background. So I'm going to ink up just the pieces that I need. Go ahead and stamp those. And again, I can just set those aside for a minute to dry. Once those are all set, I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to cut these out. So I'm just going to fussy cut around the edges. You could certainly leave a little white border if you want to, but I'm going to cut right up to that line. And I'm just going to snip away those little open areas on the umbrella. And then here's where I went back to that paper pad and selected that kind of pinky corally color. And I re-stamped those, and then I cut those out. But either one would use, or you could mix them up and have one purple and one corally color. So now I've got the striped portion of the cabin, and I'm going to cut away that door, and I'm going to cut away that window. I'm just using my We Are Memory Keepers magnetic cutting mat and an X-Acto knife to do that. So now I've got some light gray ink. I'm just going to fill in a few of those little areas, some of the trim work on the cabin. I'll also use that light gray on the chair. I want it to be mostly white, so I'm just going to add a few shadows to the chair. Just some really quick blending on that. And now I've grabbed the haze blue, and I'm just going to put a little bit in each corner on these windows, just to give it a little bit of the look of a reflection. And then one last thing I thought I would do is cut out this opening in the patio. I want to be able to see that water and sky when we're looking through. So I'm just going back to my X-Acto knife and cutting that out. Now I'll use my detail scissors to cut out all these pieces. So we're going to attach the pattern paper to this white cardstock. And that'll give us a little bit of a base to work with. It'll just add a little substance to these. So I'm just, again, going to fussy cut all the way around. Once I have that all set, and you can see there, I did use my X-Acto to cut out that little open area at the bottom of that chair. So now that we have everything cut out, let's go ahead and attach these to our white cardstock. And I did end up cutting another little piece of that striped paper for that porch. If you were doing this, you could just do that all at one time, but I did cut another little piece to make that porch the same striped color. Now I've got the little piece to attach to the umbrella. Just pop that in place. I've got that hat. And now you can see exactly where we need to place this. We still have that lost shadow ink in the background, so we can line all of these right back up and put our scene back together. And no one will ever know that we created our background separately. And for me, I feel most comfortable creating backgrounds that way. Again, if you really like that watercolor look, you can certainly use it that way as well. But I wanted to show you in this three-part series the different ways that you could use these scenic foundations. I don't want you to steer away from them because you say, well, I'm not a watercolor artist. They can be used in a variety of ways. And now you can see that these kind of corally pink sailboats, I think, stand out a little bit better on that background than those lavender ones would have. And here I've grabbed my Pit Artist pen, And what I'm doing here is just adding a little shadow. Keep in mind that these papers do have a little sheen to them. So you don't want to use your watercolor pens here. They will not dry on this paper. So I'm using the Pit Artist pen, which will dry permanently. And you can use your finger to smudge that ink a little bit if you want to. I've got some more Pit Artist pens. This is the little set. This is the magenta. And I'm just going to use that. These have the fine tip, whereas that first one was a brush marker. This fine tip will allow me to color in some of these smaller areas. And next I'll use the purple pink. And I'm going to do that little scallopy decorative edge on the top of the cabin. And then I'll also use that to create a little stitching right around the bottom of the umbrella. Now I've got my Signo White Gel Pen, and I wanted to give the look of waves kind of coming into the shore. I'm just adding really some little scribbly lines there to make it look like the water is coming up onto the beach. And then I'll just add some little scribbly lines to the water as well. So I'm not being fussy here, just really quickly adding that look. I went back to that bright pink Pit Artist pen, and I'm just coloring in the base of the little sailboats. And now what we're going to do is die cut this out. I've got my journal template die set, and you've seen me use this many, many times. I will list and link that down below along with all the other products I'm using today. And then what I'm going to do is center it and add some post-it tape just to hold that in place. I've laid some scrap paper over the top just because all my coloring is done and I don't want to damage anything. I'm going to run it through a couple of times, and now we'll have that pretty scallopy border all the way around. Now you could certainly stop here and create the card using that piece we die cut and just pop up the center of the scene for a little bit of dimension, but I'm going to die cut a second one of those scallop frames, and I'm going to attach it to this first one, leaving a little bit of a white edge around the top and the left hand side. Now I've got this beautiful 3D textured impressions embossing folder. This is from Sizzix, and this is called Tropical Leaves. I'm placing it in my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine. I've got the platform, the embossing folder with the cardstock inside, and just a couple of pieces of cardboard. Now you could stack up some pieces of cardstock. If it's too tight, just make sure you back that out. You don't want it to be too tight as you're running it through. I'm going back to the Peacock Feathers ink, and you can see here that I've picked up a little bit of ink, but I'm mostly brushing all that excess off onto a piece of scrap paper. Once it's fairly dry, I'm going to take it to the embossing folder, and here again you can see I'm grabbing some ink, but I'm just brushing off most of it onto the scrap paper and then going onto the embossed area. And that'll just pick up some of the high spots on this embossing folder and just kind of highlight those tropical leaves a little bit better for us. Once that's all set, I'm going to cut this down. I'm going to cut it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I've got some lavender and white twine. This is just some baker's twine that I had in my stash. I'm going to wrap that around maybe 3 or 4 times, and then I'll tie a little bow, and I've placed that in the center of the card. I'll tie the bow off to the right hand side. That'll leave room for our little scene, and then I'm just going to cut away any excess. I'm just using those reverse tweezers to hold that in place while I tie that bow. Now I've got some 3D foam tape, and I'm going to pop this panel up. So I'll place that tape all around the back, and then I'll just use my Cricut weeding tool just to remove that backing. And now we can put this on a little bit of an angle on the card. Now that that's all set, let's go ahead and create the card base. This cardstock measures 4 1/4 by 11 inches. I've scored it at 5 1/2 inches, so we'll have a standard A2 size top folding card. I'll place some glue all around the backing of this, and then we'll center it, and that'll leave a little white border all the way around. I've got these beautiful pearls. These are from Picket Fence Studios, and you can see how gorgeous. It's kind of a two-tone pearl, kind of a purpley pink and a little bit of a brownish beige color. So it's going to really tie all the colors together in our little scene. I'm just using my Nuvo Deluxe adhesive and my little pickup tool to attach those. Now I've got the birthday sentiment set from Art Impressions. I'm going to grab that sentiment that says "Be Happy." I'll remove that little pad from the Misty Stamp Positioner because my card is quite thick now, and I want to make sure that I have enough room for it to stamp properly. I'm using my Pink and Main Anti-Static Powder Tool. I'll just place some of that on here. I'm grabbing my Versamark Watermark ink pad, and I can go ahead and stamp my sentiment. Now you could certainly have stamped this before you put this card together. That may have been easier. I found this just as easy to do this way, but whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'm going to stamp that a couple times. I'm just pressing lightly with my fingers. I don't want to press down too hard. Now I'll grab some superfine detail white embossing powder from Ranger. I'll sprinkle that on. I'll just tap away any excess. And then we can go ahead and heat set that. I made sure my heat tool was very hot and quickly heat set that because I didn't want to get any warping or anything. So again, part 2 will be a mixed media style card. And then part 3 is going to be a set of note cards. And so we'll be using the last 4 of the Scenic Foundation sets. So in set 1, we're going to be using that cabin scene. In set 2, we're going to be using that little village scene. And then part 3, we're going to be using all 4 of the remaining scenes. And we'll be creating a card with a beautiful vellum overlay. So I hope you tune into those. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.